celebrate cat and stuff.
When people think of the Flintstones, they picture a goofy prehistoric sitcom with talking dinosaurs, Stone Age gadgets, and Fred's iconic Yabba-Dabba-Doo. But beneath the colorful slapstick, the show often slipped in a surprisingly mature theme. The Flintstones regularly wove in stories that touched on real-life adult struggles. Here are 10 standout episodes that prove Bedrock wasn't just built for kids. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Oh no! The leash broke! Pebbles, stop the carriage!
Little Bam Bam. Little Bam Bam aired in 1963 as the third episode of the fourth season. It all started with a wish almost coming true for Betty and Barney. The couple always wanted a baby, and almost like a miracle, they got one. After making a wish to a shooting star, they find a mysterious basket sitting on their doorstep with a toddler inside. Only this isn't your typical tot. He's strong, like absurdly strong, and they name him Bam Bam. The basket even came with a note that said the toddler was an orphan. So, like the responsible adults they are, they proceed to the Child Welfare Authority to report that they have found the child and to adopt him as their own. Seems all sweet and normal. So, why isn't this episode fit for kids? Well, it's the aftermath of finding the baby. First, a courtroom drama ensues between the Rubbles and Mr. Stoneyfeller, the judge, over the custody of the kid. However, after Stoneyfeller's wife announces that she is expecting, they give up their claim, letting Bam Bam stay with the Rubbles. But there's more. Somewhere in the middle of all this, Barney gets crushed at the thought of losing his son, walks off to the bridge, and braces himself for a tragic leap. Thankfully, his friends Fred, Wilma, and his wife Betty rushed in at the last second with the news that he can keep Bam Bam. This episode delves into the emotional void of being childless and explores complicated issues of adoption. The Rubbles' longing for a child is showcased at the very beginning as they spend an almost inconsiderate amount of time with Pebbles, thus angering Fred. It even goes into the territory of suicidal ideation. All this behind the veneer of a Stone Age sitcom. So that's honestly some heavy-duty stuff for a Saturday morning cartoon.
Throw them in.
How fun! Barney, quick, what would change?
Dr. Sinister. Dr. Sinister originally aired on November 5th, 1964, and marks the 122nd episode overall of The Flintstones. The episode kicks off with Fred and Barney doing their usual weekend run for Brontosaurus burgers and some buns. It's a plain Saturday, until a shady and probably terrified stranger practically throws an envelope at them. Soon after, the man gets kidnapped by a phantom. The envelope directs them to deliver the same to another address, and just like the good Samaritans they are, they comply. While Fred and Barney's plan was to sneak in the envelope at the right address and leave, that didn't quite bode well. As they were delivering, they got pulled into the house by Madame Yes, a femme fatale with a French accent, smoking a filtered cigarette. But soon, she disappears too, leaving Fred and Barney in great trouble. Cue instantly being whisked away, pterodactyl plane style, to a volcanic island and into the lair of Dr. Sinister. This is all kind of James Bond spoof territory. Green-skinned villain, lair inside a volcano, bottomless pits, torture chambers. It's all wild. Dr. Sinister tries to lure them into revealing their plans, which, by the way, they don't even have. What follows is a series of fruitless escape attempts, reappearance, and disappearance of Madame Yes, and an eventual trigger to the self-destruct sequence of Dr. Sinister's lair, before the duo finally made their harrowing getaway. To top it off, their wives don't even buy their espionage yarn until, of course, Madame Yes shows up again with car trouble. It all seems ridiculous, just as a spy parody should. But the adult satire with Bond tropes, like that of a femme fatale like Madame Yes, or ideas of manipulation and torture, makes the episode richer beyond some kiddie-level stuff. The X-Ray Story. This episode, first airing in December 1961 as the 15th episode of the second season, has to be hands down one of the most traumatizing episodes for any kid. This episode just goes on to show how a simple misunderstanding can turn our lives upside down. Dino had been a little under the weather, so naturally, Fred took his beloved pet to a veterinarian, who discovered a dinopeptic germ in Dino's stomach through an X-ray. However, this didn't seem to be a cause of worry, since it's known to be quite a common illness that only requires a little rest. But here's the plot twist. Dino's X-ray, with Fred's name and address on it, accidentally flies off to a cop who then brings it to the Bedrock PD's forensics laboratory. At the lab, Dr. Sandstone assumes the X-ray is of Fred's stomach and thus thinks that Fred has dinopeptitis, a germ that's lethal to humans unless the patient stays awake and active for 72 hours. So Wilma, Betty, and Barney, all in on the secret, try to keep Fred awake with non-stop dancing at the Rockadero, Rockin' 20s, Rockin' Bop clubs, gallons of black coffee, ice skating, walks home, cold showers, toothpicks in eyes, New Year's noisemakers, and whatnot. Wilma, unable to keep up with the lies, spills the beans, and Fred does eventually figure out what's going on, clears the air, and everyone breathes a sigh of relief. It's a classic case of misdiagnosis, immediate fear, and frantic cover-ups. The theme is all adult, but it's also a glimpse for the kids that people lie to protect their loved ones. The whole ordeal of the episode might have been for nothing, but this kind of crisis in real life is not unheard of. The hot piano. How many times do adults fall into scams? And how many times do the motivations come from saving just a little bit more money? This 19th episode of the first season is exactly about that. Fred just wanted to do something nice for his wife for their anniversary. He wanted to get her something special and not just the usual flowers. So he decided upon a Stoneway piano, but he had only $50 saved up when the actual cost of the piano was 100 times more than that. But as luck would have it, he bumped into a vendor named 88 Fingers Louie who offered to sell him the piano for $50, citing that his prices were low since he didn't have a shop or any other overhead. Fred believed him, and, seeing this as an opportunity, tried to bring the piano into his garage with the help of Barney. The idea was to do it in secret so he could later surprise Wilma. But since it's the Flintstones world and we all live in it, chaos ensues. Barney ends up crushed under the thing. Fred hides squeals in a mailbox, all culminating in the piano rolling out into the street with Fred riding on top, trying and failing to hold it back. More chaos falls upon them as Fred gets arrested by cops who mistakenly believe him to be 88 Fingers Louie, a thief. However, Fred's anniversary story makes the sergeant empathize with him, and he even helps Fred to deliver the piano to Wilma with a chorus of Happy Anniversary, sung to the tune of Rossini's William Tell Overture. A radio dispatch soon confirms the real Louie's capture, freeing Fred. It's all well and good in the end, as Wilma tells Fred that remembering their anniversary alone was the best gift of all. So, for men taking notes, the next time you wreck your brains over what women want, maybe watch an episode or two of The Flintstones. No Help Wanted. No Help Wanted was just another level in terms of adult themes as compared to any other Flintstones episode. Unemployment, creditors, gambling, broken friendships, it had it all. And partly or mostly, it was Fred's fault to begin with. Fred persuaded Barney to ask for a substantial pay increase. But the plan backfired. And so was Barney. We mean Barney was fired from his job. A guilt-ridden Fred then goes on to look for another job for his friend and finds him one with a golf-playing acquaintance called Boulder. But Boulder wasn't just some ordinary employer. He was Rocky Stone, a gangster creditor who assigned Barney to seize and bring in Fred's television since Fred owed him money. This sent Barney spiraling into agony. You can imagine the tension. Barney's stuck, Fred's oblivious, and both are sweating it. Torn between duty and friendship, Barney goes on to stew on a hill and finally decides it's best to persuade Fred to cough up the money so he won't have to part with his precious television. To his shock, he finds that Fred can't give the money back because he doesn't have it. Why? Because he has gambled it all in a golf game, and now he's broke. In a twist of loyalty, Barney slips Fred the cash from his first paycheck, includes a heartfelt and kinda sweet letter about how much he values their friendship, and walks away with the TV return. Then came the comedic punctuation. Barney finds out that his next assignment is to seize Fred's golf equipment. Ouch. So yeah, this episode definitely lands heavier with an older audience. The Swimming Pool. This is one of those super early episodes airing in 1960. This was, in fact, the third episode of the show, but the very first episode produced. So you can tell that the Flintstones was never really meant to be just for kids. Since this was one of the very first episodes, right off the bat, you can tell that the characters and animation feel a bit rougher. Barney looks different, and Fred doesn't yet yell Yabba-Dabba-Doo. Fred walks home smelling those juicy steaks he just bought and spots Barney grilling the same steaks. This convinces Fred that Barney had swiped his, showcasing just how volatile adult friendships are. This leads to a classic Fred rampage until Wilma points out the steaks were left on the fence all along. Unfortunately, Fred's embarrassment is only the start of the chaos. Shortly after, Barney starts digging a pool in his yard. The cunning side of Fred shows again as he envisions this to be an opportunity to co-own a pool between their yards with shared costs and putting in zero effort. But when is anything ever so smooth in adult land? Of course, this leads to more bickering over guest parties, property lines, and more. Fred even hires a guy to pretend to be a cop to stop Barney's pool warming party, but soon discovers that the party was in his honor. In a blowback, Fred drowns a real cop in the pool, but Barney bails him out. Everything's friendly turmoil again until it's not. Barney forgets to inform Fred that he had emptied the pool, and Fred takes a dive into the drained pool. What happens after? The vicious cycle of bickering between the friends continues. At the races. It's a shocker that this episode even got approved for a kids' cartoon show. It was the 8th episode of the first season, and nothing about the episode was kid-friendly. The entire premise of races and betting was directed towards adults. Fred and Barney, while chilling with a game of pool at Boulder Dan's, find out that the owner's letting it go for $2,000. Naturally, Fred hatches a dream big plan to buy the place, become their own bosses, and live that Stone Age dream. But they had a slight little hitch. They only had Fred's $50 paycheck, which they bet at the racetrack. Then came the lying to the wife part. Fred pretends he's been mugged when Wilma asks, and Barney cleverly crafts a giant bump on his head to sell it. Wilma freaks, calls a quack doc, and forces Fred to stay in bed while she heads out for market supplies. For any sane adult, this should have been the termination of the shenanigans, but oh no, not Fred. After Wilma leaves, they phone a shady guy, Herman, to place a bet on a long-shot dinosaur named Sabretooth and rush to catch the bus to make it in time. At the track, Fred runs into his boss. He initially fibs his way out of it, but then decides, screw it. He tells the boss exactly what he thinks and twists his big nose. The outcome is no surprise. He gets fired on the spot. However, Fred seemed to have luck on his side now, so Sabretooth wins, and Fred and Barney hit the jackpot. But lies catch up, and this was a classic case of it. On the way home, they stash the cash under a rock and confess to Wilma. An excited Wilma sends them to fetch the cash, but this time they actually get mugged and lose all their cash. However, when they repeat their mugging story, this time around, Wilma doesn't believe them. So the duo didn't just gamble at the racetracks, they gambled with their future and in the end, lost everything. Wilma the Maid. Wilma the Maid aired on January 11th, 1963, and it's the 17th episode of Season 3. The story starts with Wilma at her wit's end, totally over housework. She stages dramatic groaning as she hauls logs, sporting mascara-streaked eyes, and whining about hemopupilitis. Basically, pulling every emotional trick to get Fred to say yes to hiring a maid. Fred sees right through the act, even cracks a joke, but finally gives in and hires a maid, with zero clue as to how to pay for the added expenses. Enter Lola Brigida, an uber-lively Italian maid who cooks big meals but can't stand Fred's singing. Her name is a playful nod to Gina Lola Brigida, but when Fred presents his loud bathroom serenade, "Oh Lola Brigida, your food I diggida," which is more ear-shattering than endearing, she bails. This happens just as Fred's boss, Mr. Slate, arrives for dinner, hoping to savor some delicious Italian meal by the new maid. And at the same time, the Rubbles have the Vanderrocks over since Wilma had promised Betty to loan their maid to impress them and gain the coveted access to the Bedrock Social Club. Wilma swoops in as the maid, whips up some spaghetti and meatballs, but in all that mess, bonus, Mr. Slate bumps Fred's pay so Wilma doesn't need to keep maid hustling. It might feel like some slapstick and food hijinks, but there's depth here. This episode sheds a lot of light on the emotional labor housewives endure without being recognized for it. Even the social class posturing is quite apparent in the episode. It is silly, yes, but also oddly human. Anne Margrock presents People Aren't Always As They Appear, and this first episode of the 4th season is a testament to it. The plot lands Fred and Barney smack in the middle of Holly Rock-level celebrity drama. Anne Margrock, a megastar voiced by the one and only Anne Margaret, rolls into town to perform at the brand new Bedrock Bowl, a venue her sponsor wants to spotlight on TV. Fate intervenes when Anne Margrock's fancy turtle shell car gets a flat tire outside Fred's house. She hops in, asking to use the phone, and ends up babysitting Pebbles. The girls gel immediately, but here's the kicker. Fred, Wilma, Barney, and Betty don't realize that Annie, as Anne Margrock introduces herself, is actually the star they're supposed to audition for. While staying with the Flintstones, Anne Margrock gently coaches Fred and Barney to give up their screechy singing and give a soft shoe and hat and cane routine a try. Dare we say, they actually improve? But their high hopes get dashed when the show's sponsor decides to go solo with Anne Margrock. To their shock, they finally learn who Annie is once she gets on stage and begins her lively performance. She even convinces the sponsor to let Fred and Barney accompany her on stage. This episode, unlike the others we've discussed so far, doesn't really have an explicit adult theme, but it does have an emotional undercurrent that might not be apparent to kids. Plus, having a real-life star play a version of herself in the cartoon is pretty meta. Samantha. You think women are not good enough for the outdoors? Think again, and then go watch the 6th episode of the 6th season of The Flintstones. This was a classic case of men versus women, where men think women are too weak for some activities, like camping. Fred and Barney overtly announced to their wives that camping was strictly a dude's thing, and women can't rough it out there. This bruises Wilma and Betty's pride, but they stay mum. This all changes when Samantha, the friendly witch, arrives. She convinces the ladies to grab the kids and set up a rival camp in the woods. She grabs the kids to fetch some fish and asks Barney and Fred on the other side of the river for help. The devious men misdirect her and tell her to use rocks as bait. Now, sweet Samantha isn't one to argue with men, so she follows as directed. And, to the men's surprise, manages to catch 6 fish while Fred and Barney get none. She also sends roaring dino beasts to interrupt the men and generally twists the wilderness in the ladies' favor, all without breaking a sweat. In the end, Fred and Barney admit defeat, with that classic Fred grumbling humility. Samantha, pleased with her cheeky enchantment, departs, but decides to keep it all a secret from her husband, Darren. Marvelous verdict. Looking back, it's clear that The Flintstones was never just a kids' show. Instead, a lot of the episodes were a mirror of mid-century suburban life, disguised in stone and dinosaur scales. Sure, the puns and pratfalls made it accessible to younger viewers, but the storylines often carried a weight that only adults could fully appreciate. Whether it was tackling debt, strained friendships, or even gender roles, the series balanced comedy with commentary in a way very few cartoons dared at the time. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.